How to be a better father than you are a pastor, coming up here on the Better Sundays podcast at reachkeep.com. Welcome to the Better Sundays podcast. Focused, practical, and usable advice for church leaders looking to reach new young families and impact their community. Well, howdy, howdy, howdy. Today we're going to talk about how you can be better as a dad than you are as a pastor. And this is a very important thing. God has called us to be fathers, and He's called us to be absolutely the best fathers we possibly can be. And we can be so-so as a pastor. You can get by with a little mediocre, to be honest, but don't lose your family. Let me give you 3 things that you can do as a pastor, as a father that you cannot do as a pastor, or they're difficult to do. One of these things, and these are all kind of based on one kind of giant concept, and this is all found in the book of Proverbs, and this is the idea of using teachable moments. You and I have these opportunities that come by with our children that are teachable moments, that are just amazing things that we can do that we can't necessarily do with the pastor as easy. The very first one is found in Proverbs 24. If you read towards the very end of the chapter, you'll find that Solomon is talking. He says, I went by the field of the slothful, and he says, and it was all broken down, and everything was tattered, and everything was blah, blah. You know, it was really nasty. And he says, and I looked, and I received some instruction. I believe that we as dads need to go to when we're traveling about, when we're seeing things with our kids, we need to go, look at that. That's not the way to do it. Look at that. That's not the way to do it. Look at that. That's not the way to do it. Now, that is not a real good practice for a pastor to be naming names and pointing out places that are there. And I do understand there are places and ways that you can name some things that have been done improperly. But with your children, when you see homeless people, when you see a house that no one ever mowed the grass, when you see cornfields that are really straight and everything's perfect, and then you go to the next cornfield and everything's all crooked and messed up, or whatever the example happens to be, use the teachable moment. As a pastor, you don't have as many what we would call impromptu teachable moments. Now, you'll teach from moments and you'll give illustrations. Excuse me, that was kind of odd. Okay, my timer was going off. I have to shut my water off on my trees. Sorry about that. As a pastor, you'll have things that you'll teach about. Okay, you'll teach things that you can do, but you won't have teachable moments that just pop up. And so you can actually be better as a dad than you can be as a pastor. Another thing, and this kind of goes along the same thing, is what we call object lessons, where you, and of course as a pastor, you can use some object lessons here and there, and you would do that. But when you are a father and when you're a dad, they're everywhere. And you can see those things all over the place. And Proverbs talked about some of the object lessons there. You know, he said, oh, go to the ant, thou sluggard. You know, he said, look at the ants and look at the conies and look at all the little animals and all the different things that they do. Another time, Solomon was with his kids and he was out at the horse barn there where he kept his thousands of horses or whatever. And he said, look at this. This crib is clean here. Where no oxen are, the crib is clean. I believe it's Proverbs 14 around verse 4. And he says, there's nothing in this crib. Look how clean this is. Wonderful. But you know what? The cribs over here and all the stalls over here are filled with animals, and those animals will give us strength to be able to do things that God has called us to do. These are beautiful object lessons that can be done at any given time, and you as a dad can pull these things out of thin air because they're all over the place. I wrote in my notes here this idea of using visual aids. And as a pastor, you don't necessarily travel around with people all the time. You're not there. Now, there can be illustrations that you can do, but they're not as much impromptu. And that's why you can be better as a dad and need to be better as a dad than you are there as a pastor. The last one I wrote down is this idea of the object lesson again, but it's where you teach from the object lesson. In other words, you start to grab it. And here's the terminology that I want you to use. It's this little phrase, and we use it all the time when we're training our evangelists. It calls, "This reminds me of." Let me say that to you again. This reminds me of. And you have an object there, and you have something, and you say, this reminds me of, and it's something that just pulled up. Now, most pastors are very, very prepared. Their sermons are all prepared. Everything's all written down. Some of them are even manuscripts. They have everything, nailed down. And so the idea of just pulling a thought out of thin air, this reminds me of, is not something that you would do as a pastor. But let me tell you something, you can do it as a dad all day long. There are all sorts of things that you can do. An example, you could have a hammer and you're pounding away the hammer. You're teaching your kid how to pen and, use a wrist and da-da-da, and, all the different things with the hammer. And then you can say, hey, look at this hammer. This reminds me of, and you can point to this end. Everybody can pound, okay? But the curved end is for kind of pulling nails out. And the curved end is for like when you have a mistake. And you know what? That reminds me that sometimes it's harder to use the back end of the hammer than the front end. We all like to pound, but we don't like to admit our mistakes. And you just say, this reminds me of. So all of those are things that you do while you're traveling around, while you're doing life, you're going back and forth. And those are things that for the most part, you don't get to do with a pastor. So you know what? You can be better as a dad than as a pastor. And I would say that you need to be better as a dad than being a pastor. So this is Mike here. If this is important to you, hit the like button. More of this will be coming your way. We appreciate those that share it and subscribe on our channels. I'm so sorry about my phone going off. That means I need to go water my trees. And this reminds me that it's time to finish this podcast. So God bless you guys. We will see you again. Again, subscribe, thumbs up if this has been helpful for you. We'll see you later. Take care.